We're in Ecclesiastes, the 6th chapter. Ecclesiastes, the 6th chapter. We looked at the first verse in that particular chapter. Solomon is conducting a big experiment, is he not? And the experiment is to determine what? The meaning of life. Why am I here? Okay, and that's the question that he's asking. And in the course of experimenting, does he learn a lot of things? Oh, yes. I'd like to have the book that Solomon has where he found all the results to everything. We only have a little book, don't we? Here in Ecclesiastes, 12 chapters. We have asked this question, or at least we've made the statement. Do you think Solomon actually participated in this experiment, or did he have others carrying it out for him? It sounds like, from the way he talks about things in the book, that he was an actual participant in these things. He says oftentimes, I have seen, or I did this. So he was very much aware of what was going on as far as this experiment is concerned. And the reason that's interesting is because he was the king of Israel at the time, wasn't he? And the richest man in the kingdom, the most powerful man in the kingdom, and he didn't have to participate himself. He could have had somebody else doing it, but Solomon himself wanted to know what is the meaning of life. And along the way, he just talks about a lot of things that he learned. And one of the things that he said, Ecclesiastes chapter 6 verse 1, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. We made note last week that there are a lot of individuals in our society today who are trying to divide us, aren't they? And they do everything they possibly can to divide us. And it's amazing. Well, has anybody ever heard this term, intersectionality? You ever heard that term? Intersectionality? Nobody? Intersectionality, an intersection occurs when you have two different groups of people. Okay? You have blacks and you have what? Whites. That's an intersection. You have Asians and you have Hispanics. That's an intersection, right? You have straights and you have gays. That's an intersection. You have males and you have females. That's an intersection. Intersectionality. Well, today, the more your life is intersected, the better person you are. Okay, so individuals are trying to find as many intersections. Okay, I want to be a Asian, gay, woman, and just, uneducated or educated, which, and they just want to find as many places they can intersect as they possibly can. And our world is trying to do that. But we made mention of the fact that even though there are things that divide us, we are more alike than we are divided. Okay? I don't care how many things you put down that divide us. I bet you I can match it, double it, and probably triple your list of things that unite us rather than divide us. Right? Does everybody have to eat? I didn't say, are you ready to eat? Because most of y'all stay that way, okay? But all of us have to eat. There's not a person on the planet who doesn't have to eat. That's common to all men, isn't it? Do all men get sick at some point in their lives? Yeah, we all get sick. Are all men going to die? Oh yes, we're all going to die. There are a lot of things that are exactly alike among all human beings, because the reality is there is one race, the human race, that all of us are a part of, and God made us alike because He made us all in His similitude, after His likeness, didn't He? And so if we can ever get past those little things that divide us, we'll find out how much we really are alike. And so now Solomon's about to talk about something that happens, and that can be fairly common among men. And he talks about it in verse 2. He says, this is what's common. A man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he wanteth nothing for his soul of all that he desireth. Yet God giveth him not power to eat thereof, but a stranger eateth it. This is vanity, and it is an evil disease. Man, notice the first point. There are many people who accumulate riches and wealth and treasure and money and lands and businesses and assets. And after they've accumulated all those things, guess what happens? They never get to enjoy them. Isn't that something? Never get to enjoy them. Work their fingers to the bone, work from sun up to sundown, and then some. Work 60 years, 70 years of their life, and then don't get to enjoy everything they've worked for and labored for. Here's some reasons why. Number one, they die young, don't they? Anybody know much about Alexander the Great? What age was he when he died? Yeah, 33 years old when he died, Alexander the Great. He was a great warrior, was he not? Okay, he was the leader of what nation? Greece. Okay, died at the age of 33. He had conquered the entirety of the known world, folks. And the history tells us that he sat down and wept because there were no more nations to conquer, and he died not soon after. Can you imagine? You've conquered the world. You're the ruler of the known world at the time. You've got everything at your disposal. And he never got to enjoy it. Died too young, didn't he? Man, how about this next one? When it comes time to enjoy those things, they're in bad health. Doesn't that happen to a lot of people? Oh, I can't wait till I get retired. And when I get retired, I'm just going to travel the world. And they retire and they're diagnosed with cancer. They retire and they fall and hurt themselves. And now they're crippled and can't do the things that they thought they were going to be able to do. Happens all the time to people. I may have mentioned this. There was a man right around the corner from us. Well, he lived right in a corner house. And his name was Rob. And he walked by one day. I said, "Rob, what's going on?" He said, "Oh, man." He said, "I've got about 3 weeks to retirement." And I said, "Boy, that's kind of exciting." And he just couldn't, he just elated. And I saw him about a couple of months after that, walking around the neighborhood again. I said, "Man, how's that retirement going?" He said, "I was just diagnosed with cancer." And he says, "Nobody has ever healed from this cancer. Nobody." He died about a month later. He never enjoyed his retirement. Worked all those years, paid off his house, paid off his car, raised his kids, never got to enjoy it. He left it to what? He left it to strangers, didn't he? That's what the Bible says here. So that he wanteth nothing for his soul of all that he wanteth. Yet God giveth him not power to eat thereof, but a stranger eateth it. Notice point number 3. There's some who are so covetous that they won't what? They won't spend anything. Not a dime. Okay? I don't know about you. This is just me, okay? So you can get mad at me. Don't get mad at anybody else. I marvel at people who've been in politics all their life. Doesn't matter what side of the aisle they're on. And they're 80, 85, 90 years old. And they're just working themselves to death. And they got grandkids. They got great-grandkids. And you never see them really enjoying all the things that they have accumulated. They got 3 or 4 houses, don't they? I mean, they're going to be well taken care of, and yet it seems like they don't ever get to enjoy those things. And you wonder, what's the deal? Okay, why can't you just give this up and just go out here and enjoy life for a while? Well, you know what they like? They like the money. They like the power, they like the prestige, they like the popularity. And so because of all that, they can't enjoy what they have, and they're just going to die and leave it all behind, aren't they? Some people just work and work and work without stopping to enjoy. They die on the job, don't they? And never enjoy what they have. Notice an interesting statement that Solomon makes. He says this, "Yet God giveth him not power to eat thereof." Sounds like God's in control of a lot of stuff, doesn't it? The first part of the verse says this, "A man to whom God giveth riches." And then he says He doesn't give him the power to eat thereof. That's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? The question is this, in what way does God bring this malady upon an individual? God blesses him with riches and wealth and honor. The individual is so consumed by his wealth that he cannot find either the time or desire to enjoy what he profits. God does not intervene to give him the power to eat thereof. He allows the man to choose how he reacts to what? To his prosperity. You remember we talked about the hardening of Pharaoh's heart? And the Bible says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And the Bible says what else? Pharaoh hardened his heart. So the question has always been, what role did God play in hardening Pharaoh's heart? The role that He played was this, sending Moses to stand before him with his command to let Israel go. That's the role God played. Isn't that what God did? And He stands before this powerful man and He says what? God says, "Let my people go." Now, Pharaoh has what? He has a choice to make. He can either obey God or what? Or he can harden his heart and refuse to let Israel go. Now, I want you to think about that. What if God never sent Moses to Pharaoh? He would have never hardened his heart, would he? Everything would have continued just like it always had. Okay? Every time an individual enters into an assembly, okay, and God's Word is preached, that individual has God doing one of two things, either hardening his heart or softening his heart. And it all depends upon what? The response of the individual. If the individual chooses to obey, he's got a soft heart, doesn't he? If he refuses, his old heart is hardened. And God and the individual are responsible for that. Here God is. He blesses a man with riches and all kinds of wealth. Now that individual has a choice to make, doesn't he? How am I going to use these things? What am I going to do with these things? Am I going to enjoy them? Am I going to be covetous with them? And am I going to give them away? Am I going to keep them for myself and hoard them? Well, God's still responsible in all that, isn't He? Because He did what? He blessed the man. But man's involved in that process also in the choice that he makes. Okay, because if God had never given him all those things, he wouldn't have had to worry about it, would he? Not at all. Notice what Solomon says. He notes that a stranger eats what they accumulate. A man labors all his life to provide a good living for his wife. She dies, or he dies, she marries another who enjoys the fruits of his labor. There you go. That'd make you sick, won't it? That's the reason these men are always asking these women, if I die, you going to marry again? I'm going to buy a new car. I'm going to go buy me a Corvette before that happens. How about this next one? Children who do not appreciate the time and labor of wealth and riches received. All their parents have worked so hard to amass. Isn't that true? Parents get out here and work themselves to death, accumulate so much, die, leave it to children who just what? Just waste it. They don't care. Could care less. Or this other one, investors and managers enjoy the profits of another while that person uses his or her intellect and talent to create the wealth. Isn't that true? You just save and save and save and save and save. You get these huge bank accounts. And who's the only people that are benefiting from those accounts? It's the money managers. They're taking their 1% or 2% or whatever percent it is right off the top every year, aren't they? And you enjoy nothing. Solomon said that's not the reason God created wealth, folks. One of the reasons God created wealth is for us to what? Is to enjoy. And we talked about that in a couple of previous lessons. Solomon affirms that this is vanity and an evil what? An evil disease. Wow. This is the first time in the book that Solomon has ever labeled anything a disease. Okay? When you look it up, it's defined as a malady, an anxiety, a calamity, a sickness. This is not a disease of the body. It is a disease of what? It's a spiritual disease of the mind, isn't it? Of the soul of man. The mind is so enamored by riches and the process by which they are obtained that the individual is never allowed to enjoy the work of his hands. They love the power, the fame, the work so much that the fruit is never what? Never enjoyed. God didn't make us to work and not enjoy the things that we get, okay, and the money that we get. Notice verse number 3. If a man beget 100 children and live many years, so that the days of his years be many, and his soul be, watch that word, not filled with good, and also that he have no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better than he. Oh boy. Whew. Sometimes Solomon just makes you just cringe the way he writes some stuff, okay? We need to ask ourselves, what in the world is he talking about? In Bible times, there were a lot of things that were essential to a happy life, okay? And to a great extent, some of those things still exist today. One of them was having a lot of children, not just children, having what? A bunch of children. And the more children you had, guess what? The better off you were. Listen to Psalm 127. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is His reward. As arrows in the hand of a mighty man, so are the children of thy youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. Wow. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of what? Children. He says they're like arrows. Folks, you go out warfare, and you're a person that knows how to use a bow and arrow. You want to know what you want? You want a bunch of arrows in your quiver, right? Well, guess what? In order to be happy, the more kids you got, the better off you are. So you want a lot of what? You want a lot of quivers. A lot of arrows in your quivers. You want a bunch of those children. The more you got, the happier they are. At least that was the thinking back then. We've changed that somewhat now, right? People have one and wonder if I really want another. Yes, sir.
When our country was an agricultural country, that was exactly what happened. You had many children who worked the farm.
Yep.
Now that we've moved away from that, a lot of children have farm to work.
You're right. And we don't have as many children as we used to. What did we say, 1.6 or something like that? I think that's the average today. When I was growing up, it was 2 point something, and it used to be 3, 4, and 5, even more than that in some families, but it's really changed. Now, the second thing that Solomon says, or that the Bible teaches us, that causes life to be enjoyable is a long life. Okay? Most people don't want to die when they're 20 or 30 or 40 years old, do you? And when they do, we always say he got cheated. He didn't live long enough. We hear that all the time because we believe in our minds that to live a happy life, you need to live as long as you can. Person dies at the age of 95 and you say, woo, he lived a good, long life, don't we? Solomon says this, that may not be the case. You know what? Just because you have kids and just because you live a long life doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good life. Well, what are you talking about, Solomon? He knows two things that can happen to a person. First, you live this long life, isn't that what he said? So that the days of his years be many, but now note what happens. And his soul be not filled with good. How would you like to contract a disease at the age of 9 or 10 years old and then have to live with that for the rest of your life? Makes life hard, doesn't it? Makes life difficult. Okay? And sometimes just living a long life doesn't mean that your life has been a blessing. There have been many a person who's lived a long life, but they have struggled and it's been hard. They've had to work hard. They've never made much. I mean, it's just been a hard life for them. Or a second thing that can occur. When he reaches the end of his life, he has no burial. Now, some might say, well, what in the world is he talking about? Well, listen to the first part again. If a man begat 100 children, and he dies, and there's no what? There's no burial.
Because the family don't care.
Ain't that sad? You got 100 kids, and not one of them wants to bury you. There's something wrong, folks. You know it? Jeannie? Yeah, those are a little bit different. I mean, they desperately wanted to, but they just couldn't. But here, Solomon seems to be saying, here's a man who has a lot of children. He dies, and now remember, children are supposed to be what? They're supposed to be a blessing. Guys, you got 100 children, and you die, this little building ought to be full that day. Especially if they got married and got kids. So they roll your casket up here. You got 100 children listed on your obituary, and not one of them are here. You think that man was happy? There had to have been something going on between him and those kids for them not to want to what? Not to want to be at a funeral to honor and remember their parent. So just because you've got a lot of kids doesn't necessarily mean what? That life is good. Just because you live a long life doesn't necessarily mean that life is good. And Solomon goes on to say this, I say that an untimely birth is better than he. Ooh-wee. Most children are born after 9 months of after conception, right? That's the birth. Solomon says it's better for a person to have an untimely birth. What do we call that? That's a miscarriage. It is better for a man to have been miscarried by his mother than to enter into this life, live a long life with trouble, or a long life with a lot of children who don't love you, who don't respect you, who don't care about you, and who will not even attend your funeral. Sometimes death is not the worst thing that can happen to a person. We don't think like that very often, do we? But that's the truth. Solomon says that a person's untimely death would have been better than having a life full of evil and having no children to honor him. Questions or comments? Isn't that a statement? Sure. Chateau said, I wonder if he's talking about his daddy. I hope not. His daddy was who? David, yes. No, let's hope not. Notice this next one. For he cometh in with vanity, and departeth in darkness, and his name shall be covered with darkness. Who's he talking about? Now, if you just pull that verse out of context, you'd say, what is he talking about?
He was born in sin and dies in sin, so he'll never be given the grace of heaven. If you take it for
Keep it in his...
being
Keep it in its context, though. What did he just said? I say that an untimely birth, a miscarriage, is better than what? Is better than a man living a big life full of trouble and having no kids that honor him when he dies. He now describes this untimely birth. For he cometh in with what? With vanity. What's the purpose of that little baby's life that dies before it ever is brought into this world? Hasn't served a purpose, really, has it? He cometh in with what? He cometh in with vanity, the text says. Notice this, he departeth in what? He departeth in darkness. Where does that baby die? That baby dies where? In the womb. He never sees the light of day. Okay? And then the last one, and his name shall be covered with what? With darkness. Most miscarriages are never named, are they? Now the parents may have selected a name, but when that child is miscarried, they never name that child. They just tell you what? I had a miscarriage. And they never name the child. Now think about that. Solomon says that a child that what? Has no purpose in life. A child that dies in darkness in the womb. A child who is never named is better than what? Is better than a man who lives a long life full of trouble and has children who refuse to honor him. Now that to me is a powerful statement. You know what? Powerful statement. I wrote down there point C. All these things are deeply troubling and bring sorrow to our hearts, don't they? They do mine. I don't know about you. Notice verse 5, he says almost the same thing. Moreover, he hath not seen what? The sun, nor knoweth anything. This hath more rest than the other. You see his point? That little child that died through a miscarriage never had to experience the problems, the difficulties, the disrespect, the dishonor, the trouble that the person who did live had to experience. He said it's better to never have experienced it than to have to experience some of these sorrows of life. Have there ever been individuals who have ever said, I wish I had never been born? Who was one of those in the Bible who did? Job did. He said that numerous times. It would have been better if I had never died, if I had never lived, if I had never been born. Because his days were what? Full of trouble, weren't they? Man, for us who are here now, who, yes, we may be experiencing some hardships and difficulties, but we've also experienced a lot of good days. We got good kids for the most part. They at least love us. They're at least going to attend our funeral, right? Okay? Even if it's just to say bye, you know, or good riddance or whatever. At least they'll be there that day, you know. It's hard for us to think like Solomon's thinking in this verse. It is a bold contrast is what it is, and it's just amazing to me.